Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Passed the Genin test, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. So, began Kakashi, you all seem to know my name already, meaning you have me at a bit of a disadvantage. We didn't expect there to be 9 graduates this year, so I was a last-minute call and didn't get the roster. For that reason, let's go around and introduce ourselves, if for no one's sake but mine. Oh, and do add a personal goal that you'd like to meet, so I can get to know you a little better. He pointed at Sakura and asked her to begin. She sat there for a second, then stammered, I'm Haruno Sakura, and my goal is, she blushed and stopped, my goal is to, she glanced over at Sasuke, and grinned but quickly put her hands in front of her face and shook her head. Maybe we'll come back to you, Sakura, said Kakashi, how about you there in the blue? Sasuke, who had calmly folded his hands in front of his mouth, took a breath. My name is Uchiha Sasuke, and as for my goals, there's only one, he said quietly, with all the composure of an executioner, I'm going to kill a certain man. All 3 of the others stared at him for a moment. Sakura and Naruto looked on in surprise and curiosity, while Kakashi was unreadable. Sasuke never faltered under the gaze, as a minute ticked slowly by. Who would that be? Naruto finally asked, breaking the silence. Sasuke glared over at him. Just someone unimportant to you, he answered. Naruto wasn't quite quick enough to catch the faint upward twitch of Sasuke's mouth, nor did he notice Kakashi's concerned look. Well, said an obviously uncomfortable Genin, closing his visible eye and putting a hand on the back of his head, that's very interesting, Sasuke. How about you in the orange? Here we go, thought the Genin. A still de-sping Naruto leapt up and raised a fist above his head. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm going to be the Hokage someday, Sakura silently mouthed the words as Naruto shouted them. Naruto looked over at Sakura, deflated yet again. Yes, that's a lofty goal, Naruto, said Kakashi, but if you work hard you might get there someday. Now that that's done with, I think it's time we got down to some of the details on the test you'll be taking tomorrow. Wait, said a less than pleased Naruto, we just took a test to graduate from the academy. Why do we have to take another? I thought we were going to go on missions and get paid and that kind of stuff. You will go on missions and get paid, said Kakashi calmly, but first we need to assess just what level of missions you're ready for. If you can only handle a D or C level, then we sure wouldn't want to take on a B unless we trained you up to par for it, now would we? This will partly be a test to see how much you have to learn to survive in the real world. But Kakashi-sensei, said Sakura, only Chunins are allowed to go on B-level missions. And we're only Genin. Very good, Sakura, but should we be needed for a B mission, or if a simpler one became complicated and more dangerous, then we need to be ready. It's not uncommon for a C to turn into a B, or even an A. Said the Genin, but yes, Naruto, depending on how you do tomorrow, it might be a very short time before we start going on missions. Great, shouted the blonde, when do we leave then? Kakashi looked up at the sky and thought for a moment. How about we meet at the Old South Bridge tomorrow at 10 am sharp? Everyone agreed, and Kakashi dismissed them but turned to Naruto and asked to speak with him in private for just a moment. What's the matter, Kakashi-sensei? Asked Naruto once Sasuke and Sakura were out of earshot. Naruto, what happened to your apartment? It looks like a jutsu went horribly wrong in there. Said Naruto hesitantly, not questioning ninja intelligence, you see I was training with a super powerful fire technique that I thought up and it went sort of wrong. Naruto stopped when he saw the, don't try to pull one over on me, look on his teacher's face. There was a gas leak, and a spark from the fan set it off. I'm okay though, really. Alright, said Kakashi, do you need a place to stay? The Hokage told me to tell you his mansion was open if you decide you'd like to stay there from now on. You'd have everything and the Hokage would, literally, treat you like the son you'd be well taken care of. Naruto grinned, that's really nice of him and all, but I'm staying with the Yamanakas. They're good people I think, But thank the old man for me anyway. Plus I was going to see if Sakura wanted to go get ramen or something. I don't have much, but she would be worth it. Kakashi smiled through his mask and nodded. That's very thoughtful of you, Naruto. Here, make it my treat. He held out a small bag that jingled when it moved, and offered it to Naruto. No thanks, Kakashi-sensei, said Naruto beaming. I want it to be my treat, because they are after all my new team and we should be nice to each other because of it. The masked nin nodded and grinned, then disappeared in a blast of smoke, leaving Naruto the sole occupant of the rooftop. He turned towards the door to the stairs, and meandered his way down to the first floor, but upon hearing voices, he stopped at a corner. He recognized them as Sasuke and Sakura talking quietly, and almost walked around to greet them and invite them to dinner, but when he heard his name he froze and listened in. But why? He heard Sakura ask. Just really bad luck, that or them trying to balance us out by sticking us with a loser. Answered Sasuke. But, does he have to be on our team? Sakura asked angrily. Couldn't it have been Shino or Kiba? Hell, I'd take that Yamanaka slut over Naruto. All he ever does is run around screaming, and get in the way of, well, everything. Do you really think I care? Responded Sasuke, as long as he doesn't cost us a mission or our lives, does it really matter how much of an idiot that loser is? But he very well may cost us the mission. Maybe he'll S in the process. Naruto turned around and walked away. He'd heard enough. He paced towards the door, looking straight at the ground in front of his feet. After a step or two, his vision began to blur, and warm tears formed at the corners of his eyes. After a dozen steps, the tears flowed down his face unchecked and unnoticed, and as he reached the door, Naruto broke into a blind run. He closed his eyes, clenched his jaw, and just concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other as fast as he could. Direction didn't matter. Neither did distance. All he cared about was running away from them. He ignored the people in the street, and they did the same. He ran past all the shops and homes, not deviating from his path. He opened his eyes after a moment but still didn't see anything at all. SC. Ino, you're almost 3 hours late, said Mrs. Yamanaka as her daughter walked in the door, and set a backpack on the coffee table. Sorry mother, Asuma-sensei caught up with me and told me we're going to go on our first mission tomorrow, and then I went to Ichiraku for some ramen. They actually do make good food, said Ino, stepping up behind her mother as the older woman washed a dish in the kitchen sink. They do. That's wonderful dear, what will you be doing? I don't know. He said it was a surprise, but Ino paused. Hey, where's Naruto? I thought he'd be back by now. I thought he might be with you. Do you think something happened to him? Probably not, he might have just thought of something to do, or maybe he just went out with his team. Anyway, I've got to go and tend the roses. You know how frail they can be. Yes, I do, said Mrs. Yamanaka, looking out the window, but maybe the roses can wait. You might go see that Naruto's not getting into trouble or something. Ino paused for a moment, looked towards the front door, then at the door to the nursery and garden. Her mother watched her carefully from under a lock of hair that had fallen into her slender face. I guess they can, said Ino, I'll be back in a little bit then. It's almost 6, be careful dear. Ino left the house without her backpack, and forgot to shut the door behind her as she walked briskly down the street. SC. I'd take that Yamanaka slut over him. They're trying to balance us out by sticking us with such a loser. What an idiot. The words bounced around in Naruto's head, repeating over and over again, as he huddled high up in a tree on the abandoned police station's expansive grounds. The branch was barely thick enough to hold a child, but Naruto sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, completely still except for when an occasional sob he failed to hold back sent a small tremor through him. I don't want him on my team. He'll screw up the mission. Maybe he'll S in the process. He had his arms lain across his knees, and his face buried in one of those soaked sleeves. It was a windless evening, and the sunset allowed almost no light into the boy's hiding place, but even so, the bright orange fluoresced in the dim glow. What did I do to any of them? Naruto asked the silence, looking up and wiping his tear-streaked, pain-carved face on his dry sleeve. I never hurt any of them. I. His head fell back onto his arm, and he began to tremble once more. SC. Naruto. Ino called loudly into the gloom, as she wandered some of the less traveled roads in Konoha. Naruto. Nowhere did anyone respond to the name, except with a grimace. He's up there. Ino whirled around and put her hands out in front of her in the shape of a triangle, ready to fight the man beside her. My name's Hatake Kakashi, said the nin, I'm Naruto's teacher, and he's up there. He pointed up at the tip of a tree a block away. Ino's gaze followed and she looked throughout the branches. I don't see him, said Ino, lowering her hands but remaining cautious of the new arrival. You won't unless you're right beneath him, but he's there, and has been for some hours now. What's he doing up there? I don't know, Kakashi sighed through his mask, he won't talk to me, and he won't even look up when I call to him. For that boy to not respond, something very bad must have happened. God, is he hurt? Ino shouted, and dashed off without waiting for an answer. Very much so, Kakashi exhaled without moving. Ino dashed the block between her and the tree, and looked up through the branches. Sure enough, there was a fleck of orange near the top. Naruto, she called. There was a slight shuffle from the dark shape but nothing more. Naruto, she yelled again, it's me, are you okay? No response came, and Ino began to pace around a little, before jumping up, and without a second thought, climbing the tree. Even for a ninja it was difficult work. The tree was a bramble and bore thorns some inches long that snagged and tore at her. But Ino kept climbing, even ignoring the blood drawn when a thorn slashed her cheek. Naruto, she asked quietly, after she reached a branch level with his and swung herself up. He didn't respond, but simply sat there, staring off into space with an exhausted and grief-stricken expression. Are you all right? What did I do to be hated so much? He asked in a whisper. Ino looked across, wanting to go and sit beside him, but the branches were too thin, and the gap between them was greater than she could reach across. Ino in a bold move reached up and grabbed a branch a little less than midway between them, and hung over the gap, trying to be close enough to see his face in the dim light. Naruto, she said, pained and almost crying, what happened? They all hate me, said Naruto, as he put his head back on his knees and whimpered. Naruto, some people may be cruel, but there are people here who care about you. You don't, he shouted looking up at her, angry and tearing up again, you were one of the first ones to throw stones or kick sand at me. You were right there beside all the rest, laughing and smiling while I was curled up in a ball on the ground. Ino was silent, horrified by the realization that she had helped put him in this state, maybe not at this point, but that she was one of the people who TD him before and this is what her actions had helped to cause. She knew it was partially her fault. It was a thought that had been twisting her stomach for a day or two now, but not like this now. This was the culmination of what had been done to him for years on end. Naruto, she mumbled, reaching out as far as she could. She barely touched him on the shoulder, and he looked up at her, the anger replaced by emptiness in his eyes. I'm sorry Naruto, I was wrong then. He just stared at her, and she looked back at him, neither knowing what to say. I really am, and hope you'll forgive me. Silence enveloped the tree, and neither moved. Ino ignored the rough bark wearing at her hand, and the thorns wrapping the tree digging into her side. As the minutes rolled by, Naruto's face slowly softened and he breathed easier. Ino reached her hand out to him again, and he reluctantly took it and stood up. He looked at her and exceedingly weary, let a small smile cross his face. Let's go home, Ino said smiling, weakly but genuinely. All was quiet at the Yamanaka abode that night. Mrs. Yamanaka had not asked any questions when Naruto and her daughter arrived well after dark. She merely fetched a small box of herbal remedies and patched up several small cuts and lacerations on both of them. No one spoke throughout the ordeal, and Naruto collapsed on the couch immediately afterwards and fell into a deep sleep. Ino got up, said goodnight, and began to walk towards her room. Mrs. Yamanaka smiled as her daughter turned the corner. I'm proud of you, little one, she thought remembering how Ino left to find Naruto almost without question, you're growing up into someone wonderful. She turned her attention back to Naruto, and ran her fingers through his hair once or twice. It'll be all right, she whispered, getting up and shutting off the light, no one is going to hurt you here. She turned around, and left the room, leaving Naruto to amble in the comfort of his own dreams. Ino, however, tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. She'd try laying on her side, getting up and changing into different pajamas, switching sides, but she just couldn't stop her mind from racing back to the day's events. I was one of the people who helped crush him, she heard herself think the words dozens of times until, finally, she dozed off to them. The unconsciousness that gripped her was filled with dozens of colorful images, but they were all incoherent. None of them made any sense whatsoever. She could, however, make out voices in the clutter of images. They were yelling and screaming, laughing and crying, all at once, creating a roar in her mind that caused her to toss violently in bed. Ino, an unrecognizable voice said in the distance. Be quiet. She heard herself bark, and felt her hands press against her ears in an attempt to blot out the noise. Suddenly it was quiet. She opened her eyes and looked around, lowering her hands from her ears and taking in the stillness of the field she stood in. It was midday during the summer in a warm pasture filled with wildflowers. Off in the distance were 4 figures clustered together, 2 little girls and their mothers. Mother, said Ino, walking towards the figures. Sure enough, as her vision sharpened, one of the women was her mother, and the other she recognized as Mrs. Haruno. It was the pink hair that gave it away really. The 2 children she realized after a moment were Sakura and herself, picking the flowers, weaving them together and laughing. The older Ino heard the bustling of children and turned to look around. Several more young girls were gallivanting off in the fields towards the 2 women, carrying armfuls of appealing plants. Her mother and Mrs. Haruno received the children, and together the whole of them began playing games in the field. Slowly that image faded, leaving only a dark void for Ino to wander in, until she turned around and found herself in some kind of fenced-in park-like area the size of a quarter city block. The academy playground, she realized when she looked around and saw the buildings all around and the children playing on the equipment. Some were scattered around in small groups, playing with toys, but most were off on the practice field playing a game of soccer. Ino, however, was drawn to look to the east, on the swing set where a lone child sat. It was Naruto, but much younger, no older than 7. Naruto, she yelled, trying to get his attention and jogging that way. But before she arrived, the soccer ball landed in the dust by his feet, propelled by an especially bad kick. The young Naruto picked it up, and stood. He looked towards the group of players who were now walking from the field towards him. That's ours, shouted the foremost of the group, a child with blue hair and a green t-shirt, as he reached Naruto. Give it here. Naruto grinned and held out the ball with both hands. Do you think I could play? He asked. I'm new and... No, shouted the other boy, snatching the ball and kicking Naruto in the shin. As Naruto crumpled down to hold his leg, another student, a girl with auburn hair, came up behind him, put her foot on his back and drove him to the ground. Naruto fell in a heap, as a mob mentality took control of the group. My mom says you're a bad person, shouted a young girl, kicking dirt all over him. My dad says it's alright if I do this to you, screamed a boy who quickly kicked Naruto in the back. The young boy on the ground curled up and covered his head, crying and trying to protect himself as the children took turns kicking and hitting him. Stop it, shouted Ino, standing in front of Naruto and putting her arms out, you're hurting him. What are you doing? The children passed through her like phantasms, and continued to beat on Naruto, some throwing rocks, others kicking sand, all while the recess monitor stood by and looked the other way. Stop it, shrieked Ino at the top of her lungs as tears flooded her eyes. Slowly, as Ino watched, the crowd began to thin as one by one the children faded from existence. Soon it was just Naruto laying crumpled up on the ground, and one other child standing a few feet off. It was Ino, her younger self. Help him, cried the older doppelganger. The younger Ino looked down at Naruto, then back towards the academy as the school bell rang. She walked over and knelt down on one knee by him and put her hand on the ground. The older Ino smiled, and collapsed to her knees, relief flooding her heart as Naruto looked up with a tear-streaked face. He smiled very weakly. The younger looked between Naruto and the school several times over the course of the next minute. Then, not to be left out, she took a handful of dirt and threw it in Naruto's face. She heard Naruto whimper, then smiled and bounded off to the academy. As the vision faded into blackness, Ino was horror-struck. She fell back and lay on insubstantial ground, stunned and heartbroken. She put her hands over her face and began to sob. Ino, someone said quietly. Ino moved her hands and looked up at Naruto through tear-stung eyes. He was sitting next to her on the edge of her bed with his hand on her shoulder. The girl didn't hesitate at all. She lurched up and threw her arms around his neck, and buried her face in his shoulder. I'm sorry, she cried quietly, trying desperately to keep some control of herself. Forgive me, I was so. Now she simply broke down and wept bitterly. Naruto, not needing any explanation but already knowing exactly what she thought, put his arms around her and held her firmly. I forgive you, he said quietly, and letting her cry. It's all right. No, she sobbed, no it's not. I was so horrible to you. I kicked you, threw dirt in your face, called you names. None of that is all right, I'm not all right, I was evil. I stole your book and tore it up. I'm sorry Naruto, I was horrible. Naruto was silent, but didn't let go of her. They just sat there as time went by. Ino slowly stopped crying but her grip never loosened as she clutched at his sleeves. Naruto, I'm so sorry, she whispered in a strained voice, feeling like she was made of lead. I didn't know what. Naruto leaned back and put 2 fingers on her lips to quiet her. I forgive you, he said again, this time more quietly, but with a small smile on his face. Why? She asked softly. Naruto grinned a little more widely. What kind of person would I be if I couldn't forgive someone who genuinely asked it of me? Especially someone who's been so kind to me. Ino closed her eyes, suddenly lighter. Who taught you to be so kind? She asked, her voice calmer now. No one has to teach you to do the right thing, said Naruto. But it helps when you have a kind old man to show you the way. But for now, he continued, it's late and we both have things to do tomorrow. She nodded and slowly released her grip on him. He did the same and she leaned back. Sorry to wake you, he said with a smile, but you sounded like you were having a pretty bad nightmare up here. Ino nodded and Naruto turned to walk out of the room. Naruto, she said as he put his hand on the knob. He looked back at her with a somewhat quizzical look. Thank you, she said. He lowered his head, smiled at her, and closed the door. He'll make a grand Hokage someday, Ino thought just as she drifted off to a peaceful sleep. The next morning was bright and clear. The sky was cloudless and warm sunshine shone through the windows of the Yamanaka house. All in all, it was the start of a gorgeous day. The smell of honey awoke Ino, and she sat up in bed. What a night, she thought, stretching, and looking at the clock, it was 7 a.m. She rose and showered, then feeling refreshed and energetic, changed into her typical purple attire and went downstairs. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother was, as always, cooking the onepiece in the same sketch she always used, and Naruto was sitting at the table reading a piece of paper. Good morning, she said and walked to the table. The others looked up at her, and warmly returned the greeting, as Ino took a seat next to Naruto and looked over his shoulder. What's that? She asked, sounding playfully curious. A letter from Kakashi-sensei, said Naruto, shifting so she could read it. It details what my team is doing today. What? Ino asked incredulously after reading for a few seconds. He wants you to skip breakfast. That's silly, you won't have any stamina at all to work at the test. That does seem kind of strange, said Mrs. Yamanaka. Naruto nodded. I know, but that's what Kakashi says to do, so I'll trust him. He doesn't seem like a sinister guy to me, he said, remembering back to when the copy nin offered him the money to take Sakura out. I'm sure he has a reason for it. He very well may, said Ino, but I think it's a bad idea. You should at least eat a little, even if it's just 1 sts of the onepiece. Naruto thought for a minute, and was just about to decline the offer, when Mrs. Yamanaka set a plate in front of him, that had just 1 thin sts on it. She was smiling, and nodded in agreement with her daughter. I suppose you're right, he said, cutting it into bite-sized pieces. After all, I don't want to run out of energy. Mrs. Yamanaka fixed 2 additional plates and set them on the table, then took a seat next to her daughter, and breakfast commenced. The 3 of them began to talk about the upcoming day, and Mrs. Yamanaka made it no small point to tell them just how proud she was that they had both made it and were officially ninja. Naruto laughed and confidently said he never doubted he'd be a ninja, and Ino agreed and commented on how that final exam went at the academy, then chuckled as she recalled the look on Shikamaru's face when Naruto copied him perfectly. They all laughed, and Naruto mentioned that Shikamaru is always a source of some kind of fun. Ino affirmed that he was amusing to watch, but not much fun to talk to. For nearly an hour after they finished eating, The Yamanakas and Naruto just sat around the table and talked. The conversation was as random as it was light-hearted, shifting from topic to topic with no real aim or direction. "Hey Naruto," said Ino when things began to wind down, "we've still got an hour and a half till you're supposed to be at that bridge. Do you want to go hang around town?" "Sure," Naruto said, beaming. "What did you have in mind?" "I was going to go and pick up some supplies for today's mission, starting with a bag or two of kunai, and I thought you might want to come with." Naruto hesitated for a minute. He stammered, "I'm normally not welcome in most shops, and the owners tend to chase me out or throw things, so going into a store that sells sharp objects." "Don't worry about a thing," said Ino, "the shop I have in mind is owned by the sweetest old lady you'll ever meet." "Well, okay," Naruto agreed. "Good," said Ino, "may we mother?" "Of course dear, just be safe," said Mrs. Yamanaka. "Thanks," Ino declared as she got up, and motioned for Naruto to do the same. Together the two of them made their way out the door, after thanking Mrs. Yamanaka for breakfast and permission to go. The streets were strangely quiet for 8:30 a.m. in Konoha. Normally scores people would be up and bustling about by now, but Naruto and Ino walking side by side presented the most dense crowd in the street. The shopkeepers were all in their stores tending to whatever matters demanded their attention, or simply taking the time to enjoy the beautiful weather while business was so slow. The two genin walked down the main road to the quadrant of Konoha, holding a conversation about their respective sensei. Ino mentioned Asuma's relation to the Hokage, and Naruto joked about how Sarutobi must be nepotistic. They both got a laugh out of that, and another when Ino said she'd bet Kakashi was hiding beaver teeth under his mask. Ino stopped them in front of a small shop not far from the Ichiraku ramen stand. It was a little dark inside as racks of weapons blocked out most of the windows, but Ino didn't hesitate to lead Naruto inside. "Momo," she called, "it's Ino, are you here?" There was a sound of falling metal objects crashing to the floor, and from within the jungle of shelves an old woman hobbled out. She was hunched over, garbed in a turquoise robe, and wore her startlingly white hair up in a bun. Her face was creased by countless wrinkles, but her sharp blue eyes were as clear as the Hokage's. "Good morning, child," she said in an aged voice, "what brings you here?" "And you brought a guest, how wonderful." "Momo, this is Naruto." "Wonderful to meet you, child. My name is Amashi," said the old woman, "an honor." "Nice to meet you too," said Naruto, bowing slightly. "Now," said Ino, "what do you have in the way of shuriken and kunai?" The old woman smiled, almost devilishly, and said, "Whatever you're looking for." "How about something cheap?" asked Ino. "Child, you should know price does not concern you. I can sell you whatever I want for whatever price I want. It's my store, and I happen to like you, so you don't need to worry yourself with things so inconsequential as price." And with that, the old woman motioned for them to follow her into the heart of the store, which turned out to be quite expansive. The building appeared to merely be a front, and the structure actually ran deep underground. She pointed out to them weapons of all kinds, spears that could be compressed into a cane, sturdy shields that would fold down into an object the size of a book but expand with the push of a button, armor made from the skin of a drake. All of it was absolutely fascinating. "Where do you come by all this?" asked Naruto after she demonstrated a throwing star that was paper thin, but razor sharp and heavy as lead. "The Hokage," she chuckled. "I supply Anbu with all of their equipment, and Sarutobi-sama compensates me well for it. I take the money and use it to hire ninja who acquire everything you see here, be that from another village, or by making it themselves, I don't care. It's a good system." "Obviously," thought Naruto. "Ah, here we are," she said, stopping in front of a pegboard displaying dozens of kinds of throwing weapons. "Just pick the kind you like and we'll call it a treat for my favorite, and only granddaughter." "Thank you, Momo," said Ino, leaping at the woman and embracing her, while Naruto was taken back by the revelation. "It's my pleasure, dear, now let go please, you're crushing me." Ino and Naruto skimmed over the display. Eventually Ino settled on a small, black shuriken with 4 blades at 90-degree angles. From one tip to the opposite it was about 3 inches and very thin. "I'd like those," she said, pointing to her choice. The old woman opened up a small shelf beneath the board and pulled out a small burlap bag. "A bag of 50 midnight screams. How about you, Naruto?" she said. Naruto was still looking. He liked the midnight screams Ino had gotten, but was also entranced by the paper-thin shuriken and the firestorm kunai. What about that? He asked, pointing towards a kunai that had strange runes etched in the sides. Amashi grinned. Those are the frostcree, she said. They are made of a special kind of ice that, when treated properly, hardens into a metal that won't melt. They ell the target, then the runes activate and shatter the kunai, sending hundreds of shards of super cold metal throughout the body of the enemy. Naruto cringed at the brutality, and elected to go with the midnight screams. Amashi tossed him a bag of 50 and asked if there was anything else they were looking for. Neither of the genin could think of anything, so the three of them made their way back to the front of the shop. Ino asked Amashi how the Ajira side of the family was faring, and the two of them began talking about family matters. Naruto was lost from the conversation, and having almost half an hour left before 10, decided to wander the shop. He looked through several racks of spears, and eventually made his way to the sword department. Nothing in particular caught his interest at first, but as he looked, he started to appreciate all the skill that must have gone into forging these. Amashi sold everything from katanas to claymores and everything in between. All of the swords were works of art, some with elegant finery etched into the handle or blade, while others were made of a metal that fluoresced different colors. An especially unique weapon caught his attention. A sheath, about 31 inches long, with a handle at either end. Not knowing if it was some kind of trick to confuse an enemy or not, Naruto reached out and took hold of the sheath in the center and picked it up. It was surprisingly light for its size, almost weightless, and he put his right hand on one of the identical handles, and drew out the blade. It was only 16 inches in length, making it a wakizashi. The blade was a burnished gold, and the edge was wickedly sharp. Naruto held it in front of his face, and looked it over. All in all, it was a magnificent-looking weapon, perfectly straight, no nicks in the blade, and a totally smooth finish. He sheathed it and tugged on the other handle, and another blade emerged. It was the same length as the other and just as sharp, but there the similarity stopped entirely. This time the blade was a deep and cold cerulean, with a serrated back, and a rough pattern resembling claws running down the sides. Wow, muttered Naruto. Wow indeed, came an almost serpentine voice from the end of the aisle. Naruto turned and saw Amashi, standing there with Ino. The old woman looked startled, but at the same time intrigued. Did you have any trouble drawing those blades, son? No, ma'am, why do you ask? He answered. Interesting, she uttered. Do you know what those are? No, I don't actually. I mean, I know they're wakizashi, but I've never seen any this ornate before. He responded. Amashi chuckled, and walked up top him. She asked for the swords, and he gave them to her. The village of Maibu, she began, was destroyed long before I was born, but during their time they were famous for their mastery of forging. No one knows quite how they did it, but the smiths of Maibu were somehow able to imbue their works, especially swords and armor, with various enchantments using chakra and the very essence of themselves. Some swords could set things on fire, others would cut through any material, and others would be venomous by the very nature. Are those from Maibu? Asked Naruto and Ino in unison. Yes, they are. I went to great lengths to procure these, hoping they might open for me, but I was disappointed. Even so I kept them, as a novelty mainly, but still hoping that they might open for someone from Anbu. What do you mean, open? Asked Naruto. So you want to learn about weapons of a past era? Asked Amashi. Both genin nodded. Amashi grinned. Well, I could spend a lifetime on the subject, but we don't have that kind of time unfortunately. Long story short, at the height of their SK, Maibu Smith were able to forge weapons they called sentients. These sword-like creatures were indeed made of metal, but they also had a very limited form of awareness. Now they couldn't speak or move on their own, but they could distinguish between people, and by unknown means, act. There was a brief pause. What do you mean act, Momo? Asked Ino. I mean, she said, now like a teacher at a lecture, that the swords would choose their owner, and act for them. I mean that only the owner could use the sword, or draw it, and the weapon's innate abilities would only work when the owner was using them. Don't get me wrong, they'll be a sword for anyone, but they'll only work to their fullest potential for you. Each was as unique as its wielder, making a set explanation impossible, but it looks like those swords just chose their master. Both Ino and Amashi looked at Naruto. Me? He asked after a second. Amashi nodded and held out the wakizashis. They'll only open for you now, she said, I have no more use for them. Naruto took them and bowed low, thanking her very much, then slung the sheath onto his back and fastened the straps so one handle was at his left hip and the other was at his right shoulder. They walked back up to the front, and Naruto and Ino again thanked Amashi for her generosity. It was my pleasure, really. And I am glad that those swords will finally be put to use. She said. I meant to ask, said Naruto, what do they do? Don't know, Amashi shrugged, that's for you to find out. Maibu swords grew in power with their owners, and mirrored them, so there's no telling what will happen, now you'd best go or you might be late. Naruto and Ino looked at the clock which read 9:50. You're right as usual, said Ino, hugging her grandmother, then turning and setting off towards home while Naruto made for the South Bridge. See you tonight, Naruto, she called over her shoulder. Later, he called back. SC, you're late, said Sakura as Naruto walked up to the bridge. By all of 30 seconds. Naruto responded. Sakura was sitting on top of the arch on the bridge's south side, and Sasuke leaned against the handrail. Naruto took a seat opposite Sasuke, and no one said a word. Naruto merely tried to avoid looking Sakura in the eye, and she made no attempt to make eye contact with him. It didn't take very long for the sound of the river beneath to become the only noise. What are those? Sasuke finally asked Naruto, breaking the silence. What? These, countered Naruto, pointing a thumb to the swords. Sasuke nodded. Swords? What do they look like? Do you know how to use them? Naruto grinned, I plan to learn. Sasuke shrugged as there was a burst of smoke in the center of the bridge. Sorry I'm late, said Kakashi as he materialized in the cloud, but there was an old woman who needed help crossing the street and... Liar, shouted Sakura, pointing a finger at Kakashi. The copy nin put his hands up and grinned through his mask. Okay, relax, he said. When are we going to take this little survival test of yours? Asked Sasuke. Now, said Kakashi sternly, it's time we saw what you three can really do when your life is on the line. That will be all for this video, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos, goodbye.